Hello there. Well, as you can see, it is nighttime almost. It's, I don't know, 5 o'clock or a little thereafter. And it is December 1st. Welcome back to Blue Heinz Garage. And here's where we're at on this thing. Don't remember if I told you on the last one or not. I put the new rear end under the car. Here it is. And tightened it all up, only to find that when I put the tires on, this one was hitting the fender opening here. The tire was touching the fender opening, not the side. I mean, it wasn't a width problem, it was a forward and back problem. The other side had the same amount of clearance that was there with the older end, which right now is a little more. Because what I've done in the interim, and it's not easy to tell why that's happening. It's kind of complicated, and I don't want to keep you here for minutes or, a long time explaining, but what we're doing is using lowering blocks. We bought a pair of lowering blocks. Those were in there, and those appear to be normal. There's no offsets of any kind. Everything is center on the top, center on the bottom, same center, because that was the first thing I checked. And I checked to see if I had missed the pin when I put the rear end there. The locating pin on the spring, the bolt that comes through the center of the spring, because it's off roughly a half an inch. Because I never had more than a half to 5/8 of an inch between the front of the tire and that fender opening with the older end. There's the older end, and look at that. It's not too obvious. I haven't really tried to measure it accurately, but looking at the perches. And these perches, one thing you can see is that somebody's done a whole bunch of welding on this rear end. So the perches may very well be not centered properly. So what I'm faced with now is what I've done in the interim. I took it back apart again. Didn't take it all out from under the car, but I did remove the U-bolts, the shocks, and all that stuff so I could lift the rear end. Took the lowering blocks out. And what's in there right now, you can see this one says passenger. What's in there right now is a pair of lowering blocks that I made temporarily so that I could offset the pin location and move the rear end. So what I've done, I took some measurements as good as I could, being alone and with this thing all together. It's not easy taking suspension measurements on a chassis that's complete with the body on top of it, all the mechanical stuff installed. You go to measure between point A and point B, and there's stuff in the middle in the way. It's hard to put things across the chassis to make straight lines because, again, there's other things in the way. Well, I measured a whole bunch of stuff. I measured from the centering bolt on the spring to the spring mount right there on both sides. That looked the same. I measured from the axle housing to really not a good, something you could depend on being stable. That body mount, you see it has a hole in the center. I measured from the center of that hole to the axle on both sides. That looked pretty equal. I don't remember where it was. I took a dimension on both sides and I found a 3/16 inch difference between the passenger side and the driver's side. The driver's side being forward 3/16. Like I said, what I was chasing was about a half-inch variance. So what I did is I crafted those two lowering blocks, temporary lowering blocks. And the idea was to move the rear end back, but move it back so that I thought it was still staying square in the chassis, not further forward on one side than the other, trying to keep it square in the chassis. So I moved the whole thing back a ½ inch and added the 3/16 difference that I had found on this side. And that shows you that's where it is right now. And they look very similar. It's hard to measure from the round tire to the round opening on the body right there. But they look quite similar on the two sides. What I'm going to do now is try and get a lot more accurate. You noticed on the chassis here, there's this stud that's mounted on here. And I think it's not easy to tell even from the manual. I think that's a stud that's used by the factory in a fixture, so that they put the frame in the fixture and they locate it by that stud, and then everything, all the dimensions are on the fixture for everything that mounts on the chassis. All these body mounts that hang onto the frame and everything, I'm sure, are located in the fixture. Once you put the frame there and locate the frame from that stud, then everything just goes in the fixture and welds to the frame. There are dimensions, but I'm sure the factory doesn't stand there with a ruler and measure and weld. So what I'm going to do, I have a device that's used, a laser level, that's used for doing layout work in construction. And what I'm going to do with that, I'm not going to show you right now. What I'm going to do with that is use it to transfer all of my locations to marks on the floor. I'm going to put that laser level under this stud, and I'm going to plumb it down and put a mark on the floor. I'm going to do that on both sides. I'm going to take the laser level, which makes a beam. I'm going to set it up so that beam is just barely touching the front of the axle housing. Put that mark on the floor on both sides. And then I'm going to do a few others. My son suggested that. Scott suggested this afternoon. That's a great idea. I'm going to do the spring mount locations. That one's going to be tough. It looks like this arm is in the way. But I can put the beam there and measure off the beam, and then do the same on the floor and get that accurate too. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and get and determine whether the frame is square, whether the mounting locations are square off of those two studs. I'll drop, like I said, a plumb line down from those two studs. I'll snap a line across the floor, and then I'll measure. After I get all these other locations transferred to the floor, I'll measure off of that index line and see what's going on. What's the same on both sides and what isn't? What's changed? So that way what I can do is make a permanent pair of lowering blocks and know how far exactly to offset the locating holes in the purchase, so that I move the rear end back a ½ inch or whatever I want and get it square in the chassis. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start plumbing down those dimensions. I'll snap some lines. I'll show you that when it's done. And maybe I'll even have some dimensions by then. Anyway, that's what's going on. Wow, that's a long explanation, but it's necessary if you're going to understand what I'm doing. Hope you're hanging with me. Thank you. Anyway, thanks for watching as always. Okay, so here's the laser level. You see what it does is it puts a tiny dot right there on the floor. And right now I have it looking right at the center of that stud. So that's exactly plumbed down from the center of that stud. Hello there. Welcome back to Blue Heinz Garage. It's, I believe it's December 4th. Friday afternoon. Spent a fair amount of time this week figuring out what was going on with this differential conflict I was having with, I remember I put the new differential in and the tire was rubbing the fender opening all of a sudden, not sideways, forward and back. And it's been real tough. I haven't had a chance to get any help, so measuring this stuff is really hard. Finally came up with an idea to use the laser. I've showed you that in just ahead of this. And I dropped a bunch of lines off of different points a couple of days ago, and took some measurements and found what the problem. There's two problems. The data points I'm using are these things, which I believe are a fixture assembly tool that's used by the factory when they build these things. So those are on the chassis when all these chassis. And I also used the bottom of the lower ball joint. So you'll see there's a mark there on the floor for the ball joint, and there's a mark there with a line straight across between those two datum things, those dowels. There's the I didn't put a line across on the ball joints. I just put a 6 foot level across those two crosshairs, that one and that one, when it was time to measure. And what I did is I measured to the front spring perch mount. That's the solid one. This is the side of the spring that doesn't move, and that's right there. See that line? And it turned out that was accurate from side to side. I measured the front of the wheel opening. That's right there. And I did find a 3/16 bust on that. And this car tells you that when you work on it, that this quarter panel has been replaced. This car's been hit in the back. The rear cross member is bolted in now instead of riveted. And the cross member has no under seal on it like the other side, like the factory side. The bottom doesn't have the pinch weld like the factory side. So this quarter panel's been replaced. And that fender opening right there where it comes close to the tire is 3/16 back towards the tire, back compared to the other side, compared to the factory side. And the other thing I found was I dropped a line from the center bolt up under the spring here. This center bolt that goes up through the, whoops, now I'm showing you the wrong thing. Where is it? Here it is, right there. You notice it's off center now because I made the offset lowering blocks. That's the center bolt that goes up through the springs. I bought new springs when we did everything here because one of them was broken. One of the originals was broken. So I bought a pair of new springs. We'll come to find out that center bolt between these two new springs is 3/16 different from one side to the other. This same side that's having the tire conflict is 3/16 closer to the fixed perch than the other side is. So between those two, the bust on the wheel opening and the bust on the spring center bolt, there's 3/8 of an inch. And obviously that was causing my problem. So what you're looking at right now, right here, is overcoming those two busts. That's just moving, making the lowering block so it offsets the rear end back 3/8 of an inch. 3/16 for the fender opening and 3/16 for the spring perch. So it lines up the rear end with the spring perch on the other side. Right? Is that correct? Yeah. It should line up the spring perch the differential housing. That's wrong. I have to take that back. I have to modify it, edit this. Now I got to figure that out in advance too. What I did on this side is I went back 3/8 of an inch on this side, the 2 3/16. The 2 3/16 bus. So I equaled the center bolt on the springs, and I went 3/16 back to get a little more clearance for the wheel opening. On the other side, I just equaled the 3/16 back that I moved this side for the wheel opening. So this is what you're looking at right now, up in the air. When you put it down on the ground and the spring compresses, it effectively moves the rear end back probably another 3/8 of an inch. That's the effect of flattening out the spring. Here's this side. I've got tools. I don't have a lot of space here. That's this side. You see it's greater because they don't have that 3/16 bust on the body, on the rear, on the opening. It's 3/16 further forward. So anyway, that's the result. This is what I'm going to go with. Now I'm going to make, these are temporary lowering blocks. That's a thinner wall 2-inch tubing than the permanent one I'm going to use. I had that piece of 2-inch tubing. So I'm going to make, now I got some 3/16 wall 2-inch tubing that I'm going to make some permanent lowering blocks out of with the offsets that I've got here. I believe I have 2 drive shafts, a stock one, which is, I don't know, 5/8 of an inch longer, and a shortened one that I did when we put the 4-speed in here. This rear end being a little different, one of those I believe is going to work. Maybe the longer one. I'm not sure. I have to put them in here now that I've got this where it's going to go. And now that I move the rear end back 3/16 of an inch, and this rear end is a little different than the other one, I have to try the 2 drive shafts and see. I believe one of them is going to work. Anyway, that's my next step. So that's it. Sorry to make this kind of a long story, but thought you'd want to see what I found, and that's it. You see I got a bunch of marks here on the differential. I did 3 different operations here. First try, second try, third try. The third try is where we're at right now, and that's the minimum adjustment on the rear end to make everything square and get me some clearance on the tires. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching as always. Talk to you later. Bye.